She would always place it on her bed before leaving her home for school or work, and she would place it with its arms and legs stretched out, kind of like how you would place a teddy bear on top of a properly made bed as a child. But after a few days, she'd noticed every night when she'd return that the arms and legs would be crossed, or the arms would be resting She was young. She didn't wander around at night. And when she had seen this doll in this nice new place, she thought she could play inside of it, I guess. Now, Tony Spira, who was the son-in-law of Ed and Lorraine Warren, worked with them for years, made it very clear that human entities will not and cannot possess or attach themselves to an object. So if you ever feel a presence or experience something with an inanimate object, that is not a human spirit. So like I said, burn it, exorcism, throw it away, get it out of your life. But this little girl's spirit had claimed that she was lonely with no one to play with, and through this medium, apparently the little girl asked permission from the two girls, the women, I keep saying girls, asking if she could live inside of this doll and be with Donna and Angie. Nope. But they were touched, and they agreed that this little girl could stay. And this little girl claimed to be named Annabelle Higgins. The two women treated the doll as it was a young girl, as it claimed to be. The ladies were compassionate and thought that they were doing something nice. They'd have it sit with them. They'd talk to her as if she were human. And they even bought her cute little bracelets to wear on her wrist. They really believed in this spirit. And these women were not paranoid. They didn't think anything negative at all of this potential this was a trick of a demonic, inhuman spirit delivered to them through an unsuspecting medium. And after letting the spirit inhabit the doll, it gave the doll the power and the permission it needed to be able to inflict harm. Ed and Lorraine told them that if the situation continued to go on, that the demonic entity would have most likely killed all of them in a week or two. At this point, Ed contacted a priest and requested an exorcism of the whole entire apartment. And just before leaving, Ed himself blessed their home and the residents. Angie, Donna, and Lou requested Ed and Lorraine to take the doll from them. There really wasn't much that Angie, Donna, and Lou could do with the doll, nor did they know what to do with a possessed doll in the first place. I personally would not know what to do. But where do you take that? So Ed and Lorraine had it taken off of their hands. Ed and Lorraine now possessed this doll, and it was only the beginning of their troubles with Annabelle. Very quickly, as they placed Annabelle in the back seat of their car and drove, they felt the presence of a spirit with them. And this was not a happy spirit or happy presence. This was an angry one. The car and the power steering suddenly failed them. There were moments, several of them, where they struggled so severely with their vehicle that they almost went off the road and had several fatal accidents. The car stalled 3 separate times, and on the third occurrence, Ed pulled out a vial of holy water, and he sprayed Annabelle with this water. And sure enough, for the rest of the ride home, they had 0 issues. She was just fine sitting in the back seat. So when they made it home, Ed had placed Annabelle on a chair right next to his desk. Over the next few days, the doll's activity just skyrocketed through the roof. It would levitate and teleported between different rooms in their house. And unlike the activity that was happening when Annabelle lived with she had a little bit of yellow tape around her that said, "Do not touch." As Ed was showing the detectives the doll, his landline rang. So Ed picked up the phone and found out it was a call he needed to take privately. So he chose to take the call upstairs on a separate line. Only a few moments later, Ed heard a rustling sound from the staircase, and he looked down the stairs to see the detective. He was standing there, white as a ghost, stumbling back and forth. Ed, of course, said he would call an ambulance, assuming that this detective was having a heart attack based on his looks. But the detective shouted, "No, it is not that." He then said, "I don't want to talk about it." But he looked over to Lorraine when he had reached the top of the stairs and said he would tell her. Now, that's not too odd. He'd been working with Lorraine on a case. So, later on, Ed went downstairs to see how things looked in the museum, and he saw Annabelle lying on the floor, and the chair was turned over. Lorraine never told Ed exactly what had happened, but he knew immediately that this detective had touched the doll and ignored that tape. Only a couple of months later, he felt as though he was way bigger than this demonic thing. But no. They go back upstairs to say goodbye to Lorraine and leave. That night, the priest never made it home. He got into a bad car accident on the interstate. He hit a tractor trailer head on with his brand new vehicle, and it went out of control. The priest was only injured, luckily, but a week later, he had phoned Ed crying, saying, "I should have listened to you." And that was the last thing he recalled when he was looking in his rear view mirror before his brand new car went out of control. Years later, during lectures at schools and showing slides on his projectors to students, and every time the priest was with them and they were doing a presentation and Annabelle was on the screen, the priest would have his head down and he would shield his eyes until the slide changed and he knew they were no longer talking about Annabelle. But although minor scarings and moments of genuine fear, especially for Lou with his markings, there were other incidents that were much, much worse. In the years to follow, Ed would give tours of his museum to anyone who asked if there was a group of 10 or more. Ed loved to talk about the paranormal and share his knowledge with those who were interested. He was discussing the objects to a small group of people. This group included a young man and his girlfriend. They were both in their early 20s. At this point, the doll had been moved into a glass case because everyone who managed to touch the doll was just so